Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of NCompass Live. I am your host over here, Krista Burns, here at the Nebraska Library Commission. NCompass Live is the Commission's weekly online event where we cover anything that may be of interest to librarians across the state. We do these sessions every Wednesday morning live at 10 a.m. Central Time, and they are recorded, so if you can't come and join us on Wednesday mornings, we have 3 years worth now of recordings, I think. A lot. So you can go and watch all of those on our website.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Plow right through.
Have fun, yeah. We do a mixture of things. We do interviews, little mini training sessions, presentations, whatever we can think of that might be of interest. And we have commission staff that do presentations, and we have guest speakers, as we have this morning. Sort of a mixture. I have next to me, all the way on the far side, Mary Jo Ryan from here at the Nebraska Library Commission. But our official speaker for today is Jeff Yost, right here to my left, from the Nebraska Community Foundation, who is going to share with us a study that has just recently been updated about transfer of wealth, specifically here in Nebraska. And he is going to tell us all about that. So I will hand over to you guys.
Sure. Hi, Jeff.
Please.
I just wanted to mention that Jeff Yost represents the Nebraska Community Foundation. He's the president and CEO, and he's been a great friend of the Library Commission, and we've partnered on any number of projects. Had a lot of fun doing it, and we think we've made a lot of difference across the state. Many of you who are Nebraska libraries, public libraries, know about the work that the Nebraska Community Foundation does, and we were very happy to be able to have the Nebraska Community Foundation as a partner in our grant that we received from the NTIA, our VTOP grant. So we asked Jeff to come and talk about this issue of transfer of wealth, because we think it's key in sustainability of some of the technology projects across the state, but also any number of things that libraries are doing.
Absolutely.
So welcome, Jeff. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you, Krista. It's nice to be here. Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to see all of you.
Yes, you're the first one of 2012.
First NCompass Live.
Okay, well, what I'm going to talk about this morning is this transfer of wealth study that we've recently updated, and I'm going to really talk about three pieces. Talk briefly about the Nebraska Community Foundation and what are affiliated funds of the Nebraska Community Foundation. Talk about the study, talk about the magnitude, talk about the timing, all these sorts of things. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is how libraries are building endowments and some other opportunities for funding that may exist for libraries. So with that, I'll just go ahead and dig in. I do want to say one thing before we really dig into this. If there are any questions, or Mary Jo or Krista, if you guys have things you want me to elaborate on or clarify, please feel free. It's a small group of people. We can certainly just kind of take this as we go and do it in a conversational way.
And if you do have any questions, you can use the questions section in your GoToWebinar interface. Just open it up and type it in. I'm monitoring the questions here. If you have a microphone, we love that. Just tell me you have a microphone and you want to be unmuted, and I can unmute you that way, and then you can actually ask your question over your microphone. Whichever works.
Thank you. So just a little bit about the Nebraska Community Foundation. The Nebraska Community Foundation is all about building communities. And the one thing we know about communities is communities can only be built from the inside out. So the Nebraska Community Foundation is primarily in the business of helping to build local leadership and local community capacity. So within that context, we really have a system that focuses on manifesting local control and making sure that local residents are responsible for what they're doing, and the Nebraska Community Foundation is a position to add value and build that local capacity. So we're really in the empowerment business, if you will. One of the things we're doing to help build local capacity is to help communities build community-based endowments for all sorts of purposes. We have endowed funds for K-12 education, for local health care, for churches, for libraries, for almost any kind of civic institution you can think of, ranging from fire and rescue to economic development to parks and recreation to helping elders age in place, helping communities to attract young people back to their places. And really the highest and best use of our time is to help communities to build unrestricted endowment funds because in many ways we're not going to know what we're going to need money for 10, 20, 30 years from now. So these endowments are perpetual resources that are there to help fund and add value. And the more that those endowments can be unrestricted in nature, the more flexibility we're going to have to be able to build and sustain our place. There's two other things that we really focus on. First of all, that we're going to get all this done by partnering with people, by community leaders partnering with one another, by communities partnering with one another, by communities partnering with organizations like the Nebraska Community Foundation, the Nebraska Library Commission, all sorts of other folks. So we have lots and lots of partnerships, lots and lots of public-private partnerships, meaning that we're, in many cases, mixing local, state, federal financial resources with private philanthropic resources to help get things done. And finally, this belief in the power of hometown. Many of you have heard me talk about the fact that I grew up in Red Cloud, big Willa Cather fan, and Cather was incredibly articulate about our connection to place, our connection to the land, our connection to our communities. And that's part of what we're trying to reinstill in many of the community leaders we work with, is the belief in the power of hometown. Because with information technology like what we're working with today, people can live and work wherever they want to live and work. So why, the community development question really becomes not a question of we can't do it here because we don't have a manufacturing plant. The question becomes, I want to do it here because this is where I want to be. This is where I want to raise my kids. This is where I want to have my life. And that's really the community development question, and that's one of the things the Nebraska Community Foundation really tries to help community leaders to work through and figure out how to manifest. The Nebraska Community Foundation now has about 210 affiliated funds throughout the state. As you can see, there's a map of Nebraska here. We have affiliated funds now in 77 of 93 counties, benefiting about 230 communities. And that number continues to increase. That number's probably increased by 6 or 7 since June 30th of last year. So that number just continues to increase. Many of these funds are what we call community-based funds, but there are others that benefit specific organizations. So it might be a local hospital. The Nebraska Library Association has an affiliated fund with the Nebraska Community Foundation. So anything from the State Chamber of Commerce to organizations that are working on K-12 education. And then in many cases we have donors that come to us, and an individual or a family creates what's called a donor advised fund, or in many cases when somebody passes away within their estate, they have left a gift to create a specific fund for a specific purpose. And I'll talk about a few of those as we dig into this presentation today. This is just a quick summary as of July 1st of last year. And one of the things I'm really pleased with is the Nebraska Community Foundation is growing very rapidly, and in the last 6 months it's continued to. We have about 1,800 local leaders that serve as leaders of these affiliated funds. And by affiliated fund, what I mean, and I'll just give you a quick little example of my hometown in Red Cloud. Red Cloud has an affiliated fund with the Nebraska Community Foundation. So they really would have had two choices when they got started. They could have created a new 501c3 nonprofit corporation and called it the Red Cloud Community Foundation. Or they chose to affiliate with the Nebraska Community Foundation, so they created the Red Cloud Community Foundation Fund, which doesn't have its own legal status. It gets all of its legal status through its affiliation with the Nebraska Community Foundation. So we take care of all of the financial matters, so the accounting, the bookkeeping, the receipting, the audit, all of the financial management pieces, all of the risk management pieces, so liability coverage, insurance, we take care of all the investments, so all of the fiduciary aspects of doing that are taken care of. The idea of that is if all of those administrative and fiduciary pieces are taken care of, it frees up local leadership to focus on the mission that they volunteered to pursue. So if their volunteer mission was to pursue building new financial resources for the local library, they don't have to worry about all this administrative stuff. Their affiliation with the Nebraska Community Foundation takes care of that. And then the Nebraska Community Foundation does a tremendous amount of training, mentoring, peer learning, lots of resources to help community leaders become comfortable with the effort of fundraising, community building, really involving more people. How do you have a participatory model? How do you get lots of people in the habit of giving? And then once they're in the habit of giving, how do you talk to them about doing something within their estate to give back to their place, to give back to their charitable causes?
And some library foundation groups do have affiliated funds with you, right? There
Right.
are some library foundation groups.
So let's come back to the case of Red Cloud. In the case of Red Cloud, you have a Red Cloud Community Foundation fund. Within that fund, there are actually 18 separate accounts within that fund, all of which are benefiting different specific purposes for that community, for that geography. So there are funds in the Red Cloud Community Foundation fund. There are accounts that benefit everything from the local park system to scholarships to the local library, the local healthcare system, specific curriculum within the K-12 educational system, early childhood education, recycling. There's a few different funds set up for historic preservation purposes because of all of the Catholic cultural amenities that exist there. So that's one of the things that many libraries have done is libraries have created an account within their existing community-based affiliated fund. Okay, so those just show, those just show you some other pieces. The other thing that I like to point out on this particular page is the numbers are pretty self-explanatory and they've become fairly large. But one of the things I've really concentrated on over the years is how do we get lots and lots of Nebraskans in the habit of giving back to their community. Nebraska, all of us as Nebraskans, we're habitual people, and I think that's a good thing. And one of the things we've tried to do is help people to get in really good habits. And we're already in the habit of giving to church. We're already in the habit of giving back to things that benefit kids. But in many cases, we've never sort of expanded that habit to be more of a broad-based community development effort. So as you can see, there's over 36,000 gifts that have been given in the last 5 years to the Nebraska Community Foundation and affiliated funds of the Nebraska Community Foundation. The idea being is if you can get lots of those people in the habit of giving, then this transfer of wealth that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes is something that becomes much easier to manifest because people are already familiar with the mission, familiar with the goals, familiar with the good that can be done, and now they can begin to think about this beyond their lifetimes. This is just another little stat that shows the growth of the Nebraska Community Foundation in the last 10 years. The dark blue are endowed assets. There's about 40 million of endowed assets. There's about 30 million of non-permanent assets. And now there's about another additional 40 million in what are called expectancies. And an expectancy is when someone creates a provision within their estate plan to benefit a charitable cause, and they've told a member of the Nebraska Community Foundation staff about that. So the only ones that we count are the ones that we actually have clear documentation for. So let me give you a couple examples of what an expectancy is. The one we might immediately think of is there's a provision within my will. Okay? The other ones that are actually much more common are things like changing the beneficiary designation on a financial account. So whether that be a savings account, a certificate of deposit, a life insurance policy, a retirement plan, all of those things have a beneficiary designation on them. Most people just have those signed over to their spouse or their children. But as people look at these, and especially if there are tax consequences, say with an individual retirement account where all of the proceeds have been put into that account on a tax-free basis, well, it's not that that account is never taxed.
Mm-hmm. Eventually.
Right. It's going to be taxed at some point. So usually it's taxed when people withdraw from that account. But what happens when a person passes away is all of those taxes come due. So one of the things you want to encourage people to think about is thinking about gifting what are their most tax-laden assets.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's that bank of certificates of deposits that they're using
could be.
to live on the interest.
And obviously I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes, but you know, there's lots of other assets out there that are highly appreciated these days. All of us know about the boom that's happened within agricultural property values over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of land out there where the cost basis might be 5 or 10% of what its current market value is. But that's a quick definition of what it very well could be. We have lots of people that have said, within my will, I'm giving a quarter section to each of my kids, and I'm giving a quarter section to my local community foundation, whatever the case might be. This is just a quick slide to show you some of the resources. So if people want to do this, you can easily go to the Nebraska Community Foundation website while we're having this webinar and look at some of these resources. We have a really robust website that takes folks through lots and lots of pieces about this sort of research, but also many of the training resources that we have. So these show you a couple things, and this may be an easy way for you to turn around and share it with other members of your community or other patrons you have of your library. So last year, we updated a study that we had originally done in 2002. Let me just give a little bit of background. In 1999, there was a study done called Millionaires in the Millennium, done at Boston College. And those researchers suggest that over the next 50 years, you're going to have a $41 trillion transfer of wealth in the United States. Right. I'm an economist by training. Those sorts of numbers don't make any sense. They're just absolutely massive.
Yes.
Absolutely massive numbers. So myself and a colleague, a guy named Don Mackey, we got together and said, this is something that we've always intuitively known is happening. In a place like Nebraska, where Mary Jo grew up in North Platte, I grew up in Red Cloud, we're both now here in Lincoln. You know, what happens when the parents pass away and the heirs no longer live in these communities? That's wealth transfer. That's what we're talking about here. So part of what we've always intuitively known was happening was, as young people were moving away from these communities, not only were communities losing that human resource, but when those parents pass away, you were potentially also losing all of those financial assets that have been made and accumulated over time, because the heirs to those, you know, those estates, in some cases those fortunes, were leaving. The thing we know from a community economic development standpoint is that communities do well when they have assets that are locally owned and locally controlled that can be reinvested in the future of that place. Places that are dependent upon assets that are externally derived are places that are dependent upon someone else. And
there's no multiplier for the funds that are spent there?
It all becomes much more difficult if you're working with somebody else's money as opposed to local assets. So that's, you know, so that's the thing we're trying to figure out here, is not only how do you help use this transfer of wealth to talk with people about reinvesting in their place charitably, but how do you use all of those assets and understanding the magnitude of these assets, so, you know, hopefully private sector investment absolutely dwarfs what happens philanthropically. So since we did that study in 2002, a number of things have changed. One is we've had a new census. Two is we've seen just an incredible boom within production agriculture over the last several years, and that has manifested itself not only in much, much higher commodity prices, but much, much higher real estate land values in agriculture as well. We've also, of course, we've had a recession nationally. I would say Nebraska has really been an oasis within this economic desert that we've been living within nationally, but it doesn't mean the recession hasn't had effects. Here in Nebraska, certainly it has within Nebraska state government.
Absolutely.
And since we did that original study, that was really the first study done nationally, Don Mackey and his colleagues have had the opportunity to do research like this in 40 other places around the country. So the methodology we're able to use is much more sophisticated than we originally did this almost 10 years ago. So here's the quick results of that study. Over the next 50 years, we're going to see a $600 billion transfer of wealth in the state of Nebraska. For 1.8 million people, that's a massive amount of money. I mean, it's well over $200,000 per person that's going to transfer from one generation to the next.
Wow.
The second bullet, these 2011 estimates are an 84% increase over our original finding of $258 billion. But the next slide I'm going to show you is really that's the opportunity stuff. Now here comes the threat stuff. 51 of 93 counties, because of the demographic shifts that we've been experiencing, will experience their peak transfer of wealth today or in the next 10 years. And here's that map. All those counties in red are the places where the peak transfer of wealth is already happening, like Webster County, where I grew up in south central Nebraska, or it's happening in the next 10 years, which means this transfer of wealth is a massive opportunity, but it does have a shelf life associated with it. It doesn't mean that we can just sit back on our laurels and assume that, well, there's plenty of money floating around out there some of this is going to come back and accrue to us. I am very much of the opinion that we need to be assertive and willing to go out and talk with people about the opportunity, because, you know, anytime something's peaking, the likelihood of it coming back and peaking again, especially with the sorts of demographic shifts that we've seen in many of our rural counties, I don't think that's very likely. You know, in many of the places we're working, we're trying to help them work on strategies for population stabilization. Well, that's much different than population growth. Now, population stabilization will help to even out this transfer of wealth. But as I look at my family, I'll just take my family for example. I'm the 6th of 6 children. Only 2 of my siblings continue to live in Red Cloud in Webster County. The other 4 of us are someplace else. So if my parents were to do what parents typically do, which is take whatever they have and divide it by the number of children they have, if my parents were to do that, 2/3 of whatever they've made and accumulated during their lifetime leaves my hometown. Now, you don't want to say, well, parents shouldn't be giving to their children. Of course they should be giving to their children. What the example I like is what my parents are doing within their estate plan. They're actually treating my hometown of Red Cloud and the Red Cloud Community Foundation Fund as a 7th child within their estate plan.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's the stuff we want to talk with people about. This is not an all or nothing proposition. This is about talking about there is this massive amount of money. These sums that are almost unexplainable. But those sums of money, you know, as you see every farm sale, as you see every estate sale, as you see every funeral, whatever the case might be, those sums of money in many cases are going someplace else.
And how many people who love their communities and love their libraries would be willing to consider the library as one of their children? I bet they would.
I think lots.
I do too.
But the thing that we find is you just can't put the information in front of people and expect them to act. You have to go a bit further to say, have you considered? How can we help you? Myself and my colleagues at the Nebraska Community Foundation, you know, I've been doing this work now for 14 years. I've done this in lots of places and lots of circumstances. We are in a position where we can help people to figure out how can you comfortably begin to have that conversation with someone, especially, I mean, a library volunteer is a perfect example. We always talk with people about giving in 3 ways. They give their time, they give their talents, they give their treasure. Well, we give our time and talents during our lifetimes. And in many cases, we're writing checks for $100 or $250 or $500 a year to many charitable causes, and the higher sums to our favorite charitable causes. But that doesn't continue forever. The only way it continues forever is when somebody does something in their estate plan. They've endowed that money, so that creates a perpetual stream of income to continue to support and sustain that charitable cause, that civic institution that they gave all that time and effort to help build and sustain over time. So this is just a quick summary of what we've just seen and what we've just talked about. I mean, the transfer of wealth is a unique opportunity to build philanthropy and endowments. Historically, with many civic institutions, especially libraries, we've assumed that the local tax base can do everything we need it to do to sustain these institutions. Before I came to the Nebraska Community Foundation, I spent about 5 years in the governor's office, and I did a tremendous amount of work on federalism and unfunded mandates and sort of future fiscal policy as it related to state and federal government. And what we saw was just with entitlement spending, that being Social Security and Medicare in particular, you're just going to have less discretionary domestic investment available over time from the federal government to help support and sustain our local institutions. So unless we're assuming that the taxes we pay as citizens of Nebraska go up dramatically, or the taxes we pay as local residents go up dramatically, we're going to need to find some other alternate source of finance. Well, this is one. This is huge. And this could potentially be a big piece, but you wouldn't want to just take that money and spend it If you take it and create an endowment with it, it creates that perpetual stream of income to support that charitable cause indefinitely. The second bullet, one of the things we've always talked about within community development in Nebraska is we've had just a little more money, if we had just a little more capital, we could solve our problems. Okay, we have capital at play, but it's a completely different animal than we're traditionally used to. Mm-hmm. The one thing I can tell you about philanthropy is philanthropy has nothing to do with democracy. The only way people give is if they are individually motivated to give. This is entirely an act of personal discretion. People have to be motivated, people have to be inspired, they have to be convinced that what they're going to give to is a good cause and that their gift is going to be well managed. Again, something the Nebraska Community Foundation can help folks with. But it's to really take that argument away that if we just had more money, we could figure out how to do this stuff. We have an opportunity over the next few decades to use this transfer of wealth as a transformational event. Let's talk about what could be there. And the next two bullets, I think I've already talked about these. You know, we want to use asset-based community development to achieve sustainability with our own assets, not somebody else's. And finally, to break out of this cycle of dependency, because we still have a lot of public services that are being paid for by somebody else. And I'm not sure that that is a tenable trend line in terms of assuming that the next 10, 20, 30 years, that's still going to be the case.
Well, you hear there's lots of news stories about libraries having to fight to keep their basic budgets, to keep the money that they are getting from taxes.
Right.
Which is
So
going
you got to figure out now.
not as far as it used to.
No. And
Yeah.
if your community hasn't had that battle yet, it might have to. So think ahead and be prepared for it.
I think that's absolutely correct. And in many cases, somebody might, I mean, I haven't had that many people ask me this, and I've been somewhat surprised that they haven't. Well, if we raise charitable resources for the library, the city council might be inspired or motivated to cut back what we're doing.
Need.
Well, one of the things we can do is help you craft your donor intent, whereby the charitable dollars are only available if the locally elected officials continue to support that institution.
Nice.
There's lots of ways that we can structure this to actually help lever existing public finance. So there's lots of opportunities to use this to help people do the right things. But it takes a lot of forethought, it takes a lot of planning, it takes good execution to get to those. These typically just don't fall in our lap. So what we've done with all the wealth transfer research, and all of this is available on the Nebraska Community Foundation website, is we have broken this out by region because, of course, we know in eastern Nebraska we get 28 or 30 inches of rain. In Scottsbluff and Gering and in the Panhandle, you get 12 to 14 inches of rain. They're vastly different economies with vastly different real estate values, I mean, all sorts of things. So as opposed to saying, well, I'm trying to compare my transfer of wealth against what's going on in the Omaha or Lincoln metro areas, or what's happening in York County where there was a quarter section of land that just went for over $10,000 an acre, that's, you know, these aren't necessarily apples to apples comparisons. So by breaking this out region by region, it becomes easier for people to look at this stuff. It also becomes easier for you to talk about, this is what's happening within my particular place. So this chart, and I realize this is probably kind of hard to see, but if you just go across the top line is for all of Nebraska, and we've estimated the 10-year transfer of wealth and the 50-year transfer of wealth statewide in each of these regions and by every county. So I talked about $600 billion transferring over a 50-year period. Well, we think $58 billion is transferring in the next 10 years. So if you just look at a modest goal, let's say 5% of this gets given back to community endowments, that's almost $3 billion. I mean, these become staggering sums, even using very, very modest pieces. So how do we convince lots and lots of people to begin to include their community, their favorite charitable causes, which may include the library, in 5% of their estate plan, or by including it as another child within their estate plan, something. And not everybody's going to do it, but if we can convince a fair number of patrons to step up and help, collectively, that begins to make a big difference.
I think that's the key thing, is that we're not talking about just picking out the person in the community who you think is rich.
Right.
We're talking about people who have moderate incomes and moderate estates, but if they give a portion, if lots of people give a portion, it all adds up.
This is primarily about middle-class philanthropy.
Yeah.
The whole system the Nebraska Community Foundation has built is intended to support, grow, and sustain the middle class. That's how you have great communities, is you have a wide-ranging, growing middle class. Certainly what we've seen over the last 20 or 30 years is the middle class is shrinking. But by having these sorts of community institutions, by having these sorts of community resources, people that have options, young people with education that have choices, the likelihood that they're more interested in coming back home or coming back to a regional trade center that may be near their parents becomes much more likely, because these are people with choices. So they're looking at, okay, who has a world-class educational system? Who has world-class community resources, like a library or recreational facilities or whatever the case might be? You know, this is, I mean, Nebraska is an eminently manageable place. It's one of the great things about Nebraska is we can actually figure out how to make all these things work.
As opposed to some places.
And as you look at mobility trends over the last 5 or 10 years, you know, Nebraska is now experiencing in-migration from California. There are more people moving from California to Nebraska than are moving from Nebraska to California. These are not unimportant trend lines to look at, but it doesn't mean they're going to stay. If they find other places that also work, Nebraska isn't the only place that works. There's other places in the country that work. We have to use these things to create a competitive advantage and then team that with people's desire to be here. Okay, so I'm gonna keep clicking through this because I want to get to some questions and some more conversation. Again, the Nebraska Community Foundation is working in about 230 places around the state. We've just picked some to show you what is possible. And all of these things have happened in the last 5 to 10 years. So these aren't things that have been in place for 40 years. The little town of Shickley in Fillmore County near Geneva, 340 people because of really intense, dedicated community volunteers. You know, almost 700,000 in endowed assets, almost $2 million in estate gifts. And I think there's 15 different estate gifts that make up that $2 million estimate. So lots of people. Everybody on their, what we call a fund advisory committee, so the advisory body for their community-based affiliated fund, every one of those 12 people have now done something within their estate plan to benefit that community. That sort of modeling behavior sends incredible signals to the rest of the community that, you know, I'm in, I'm vested. I'm not just leading with words, I'm leading with actions. And as you think about building the endowment for your library, I think talking with your foundation board or your advisory committee for your affiliated fund, whatever the case is, people's willingness to talk about these things goes up immensely if they've done something themselves. I mean, I can talk about my own circumstances. I mean, I've got my wife and I are both well educated and have good careers and so forth. 3 kids, 14, 11, and 7. So people would say, well, how would you do something in your estate plan? Well, I have all of my life insurance in place, so if something would happen to me, everything gets taken care of. But a portion of my retirement plan, my tax-deferred retirement plan, is designated to benefit the Nebraska Community Foundation. So there are things that I've been able to do within my estate plan, even being in my early 40s. So people might say, well, young people can't do this stuff. We probably have as many of those confirmed expectancies by people under 50 as over 50. And that sort of modeling behavior makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I'd say.
So there's other examples here. Pender in northeast Nebraska, tremendous success. Burwell in the last 10 years has reinvested $1 million in their community through their community-based affiliated fund. And for the first time in many, many years, Burwell and Garfield County grew 7% in the most recent census. McCook's a great regional trade center, tremendous community leadership. McCook's invested several $100,000 in McCook over the last 10 years through its affiliated fund. And as you can see, significant endowed assets, significant expectancies. Holt County in north central Nebraska, we've worked through a process of working with each of those municipalities, and each of those places are now working together for a variety of countywide purposes, including a countywide economic development effort, but over $3.5 million in endowed assets now, focused on issues like local business transition, building more entrepreneurship and more economic opportunity. Many of the scholarship funds that are being focused on scholarships not just for the best and brightest kid, but scholarships for students that are interested in going off to the community college system or the four-year system, but returning to Holt County after they've received their education. So, community leaders there are being very, very intentional about what are these charitable dollars for, what do we want the outcomes to be. So every one of these counties, all 93 counties, you can get on the Nebraska Community Foundation website and see the transfer of wealth analysis for your county. So these are the numbers for Holt County. In the next 10 years, and again, so Holt County has 10,400 people in it in the last census, okay? In the next 10 years in Holt County, and this is, there's good agricultural land in Holt County, but there's certainly a lot more non-irrigated land and ranch land in Holt County than there is irrigated high-end land. So this isn't the wealthiest county in the state by any means. But over the next 10 years, $344 million is what our estimate is for the 10-year transfer of wealth. Over a 50-year period, almost $3 billion. So what do those numbers look like if just 5% of that were given back? As you can see, Holt County has had tremendous success. Just through their affiliated funds through the Nebraska Community Foundation, $3.5 million has already been given back. But that's a far cry from 5% of the 10-year transfer. This is a massive opportunity. So we're used to talking about sums of $100 and $500 and $1,000 or $2,500 being a big gift. We want to use those gifts as stepping stones to get people in the habit of giving, to begin to have a set of conversations with people about what they might be willing to do in their estate plan. Because there's a lot of people out there that are living very modestly who care deeply about their community and the institutions in their community that very well may be willing to do something if somebody talks with them.
And I maintain that the people who work in the libraries in Nebraska know who those people are.
Totally.
You know who the people are who love your library and who come in every week and who would be devastated if you had to close your doors. And they're the ones that can ask others that can model it by giving, but also ask others to give too. So
this is a bit of a segue, but I think it makes sense. If someone gets in the life insurance business, what are they told to do? And the answer is friends and family first. The same thing works for charitable giving. People give money to people they trust, especially people they trust that are supporting good projects. People just don't give money to a project. All of us have seen campaigns out there that just kind of languish.
Exactly.
Because people haven't been willing to use their trusting relationships to say, this is something I deeply believe in. Now, it's entirely up to you whether you choose to do something, but I'm asking you to consider doing something. That's what it takes, is some sort of an introductory conversation. This isn't selling a better brand of toilet paper. This is selling your hometown. This is selling the institution that people have already given lots of time, lots of their talent, lots of their energy to supporting. And we have proof positive that when you reach out to those people that are truly patrons, truly those volunteer leaders, their willingness to do something is pretty high. But usually that's not self-initiated.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at a place like Holt County. This is what it looks like over a 50-year period. The blue line represents all of Nebraska. So we think from the portions of estates transferring, that's the left-hand axis, and time is the bottom axis. The percentage of estates transferring on an annual basis, in Nebraska, it continues to go up a little bit over about the next 30 years, and then it kind of flattens out. In greater Nebraska, so that's everything that's not a metropolitan statistical area, so it's everything basically except the Lincoln and Omaha metropolitan areas and Dakota County because of its proximity to Sioux City, Iowa. That green line is all of greater Nebraska, and that's pretty much flat over that 50-year period. But Holt County, because of its demographic trends, the peak transfer of wealth is happening today.
Wow.
And it continues to trail off because you create 50 years of estimates based upon 50 years of history.
Well, there's a sense of urgency there, isn't it?
Right. And if you look at most of these counties that are in red, that's what the trend line looks like. So that's not, that's not created to say to people, you have an emergency. It's intended to say to people, you have an opportunity, but the opportunity diminishes over time.
And there's 51 of those 93 counties in red.
51 of, so we can flip back to that. There we go. So as you can see, there's 51 counties in Nebraska that are in red, and the ones that are in gray are happening in the next 2 generations. So it's pretty much only the I-80 corridor and a few other places that have had some unique demographic circumstances, like Dawes County, but pretty much everything else is along the interstate corridor and the fishhook. And as you can see, even if you're on the interstate corridor, that doesn't mean that's the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Keith County, I mean, you've had everything that's happened with Cabela's in Sydney, but the transfer of wealth stuff in Sydney is still peaking in the next 2 generations. So there is real immediacy associated with this.
Yeah, if you're in one of those red areas, you got to jump
Time
on.
is
This your
now.
time. Yeah.
And I think the other thing that we've learned over time is you start talking with people about their estate planning. It's a long-term conversation. People don't turn around next week and go to their attorney and say, this is what I want to do. So we need to start the conversations now because they're conversations that take a while.
Just like anything you do to promote your library services or promote using the library, it's an ongoing process, not a one-shot deal.
All right, so to kind of wrap this up, and then I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on what's going on specific to libraries. What do you do now? There's, as I thought through this, it seems to me there's 5 things that you can do now. You could choose to establish an endowment for your library. Number 2, if you have an endowment, make a gift to it. And ask everybody that's a patron of your library, especially everybody that's helped leading, whether it be your library board, your board of trustees, your board of your existing foundation, your advisory committee for your affiliated fund, whatever that leadership group is, they need to be giving. That's modeling behavior. And if it's $100 a year, that's fine, but they're in the habit of doing it. And then once those folks are doing it, asking your library patrons to do similarly. Because we are absolutely convinced that getting people in the habit of giving is what makes them much more likely to do something within their estate plan. Number 4, again, this modeling behavior. Look at your own estate plan and figure out what you can do to benefit your library. And it might be changing the beneficiary designation on a $10,000 life insurance policy. I'm not sure that it has to be something massive. It's something that says, I'm willing to do this, I'm willing to show modeling behavior, I'm willing to show leadership, because then you can share your example with others. And it becomes the easiest way to share it, as opposed to saying, Bill and Jean are doing this. And those are nice stories. But if you can say, my spouse and I, or I am, or whatever the case is, I think it makes it much more personal for people. And they're probably more willing to then ask you a question, why did you do that? How did you do that? How might I be able to do that? Which leads us to number 5, which is the whole idea of then, once individuals have shown that leadership, that modeling behavior themselves, talking with your library patrons about doing something similar.
I think what you're saying about the middle class, that this is for them, that I think is something that kind of jumped out at me as important, that you don't have to be rich to help your local community.
Right.
You don't have to be the guy who owns the Cabela's or whatever. You can be just the library director who works part-time at the library was able to do this, so you can too. And all these little ones together add up, and it makes a difference in the end. You don't have to get.
Well, especially if you look at that chart that shows what the 5% adds up.
Exactly. Yeah. All that.
Good grief.
Yeah.
That's
No, this isn't something for the 3 to 5% of high net worth folks. I mean, we are interested in high net worth people giving too. But I'm interested in middle class people, people with some options, but not great wealth, but people with some options showing leadership, because these are the things that change the future of our place.
And you're talking about the people with modest incomes, the way things are going now, just in the whole country, are probably using all the community resources even more. The middle class who could use, maybe in the past, take care of themselves more, are now not able to. They have to go to the library to get their internet access. And they're ones that would really be attracted to this kind of thing. That I can't even afford my own internet, the library helped me, so yes, I can do something to give back.
You know, but as I go back to folks like my parents and people in their generation, my folks were born in 1929 and 1931 respectively. They're Depression era babies. They grew up in the greatest generation. You know, these are people that helped build these civic institutions.
exactly.
They have a deep interest. They have, you know, I think profound both pride, but also potentially a sense of responsibility. And in many cases, what we see as most effective is these people's children talking to them about, have you considered this? Because as parents, you did what you needed to do. You know, myself and all of my siblings, we're all college graduates. We've all done just fine. You know, so as we think through this, you know, how many families could think about doing something to help promote and sustain the future of their community, and really leave a legacy in terms of, okay, what are you leaving on this earth beyond, of course, your children and hopefully the good work that they're doing. But this whole idea of leaving a legacy is something that really does seem to resonate with people, especially when you talk with them about the things that they have been most deeply vested in during their lifetime.
And just asking that question of your library people who come in the library all the time.
Right.
A lot of them are going to say it is the library.
Well, if it is the library, then there is a subsequent conversation that we need to help them have. And again, the staff of the Nebraska Community Foundation would be happy to help you figure out how you would approach someone, because we understand these are delicate issues. And is estate planning an entirely rational activity? No. It's very emotional stuff. You know, people are they're dealing with their death, for goodness sakes. I mean, this is hard stuff to grapple with. But almost everybody, they want to have a plan. And if they have been in a position and been intentional enough over time to stay vested in that cause, like the library over time, the chances that they want to be intentional about their estate planning, deep down they want to do that too. So we're really providing a service for people in helping them begin and have these conversations.
And I guess I'd like to ask, for those of you that are with us live today, if you have any thoughts right now about how this feels to you, or if you can see yourself doing some of this or working with volunteers to do this, or if you have any questions, if you'd share those with us right now, that'd be great. As Krista said, you could type them in your comment box right on your computer, or if you have a microphone, you can just raise your hand, click on the hand raise thing, and tell us that you'd like to have your microphone unmuted and you'd like to share any of your thoughts with Jeff or ask him any questions. We'll give you a minute to do that.
Yep, we'll see. I'm monitoring everything here, so I'll keep an eye on it.
Krista's got her eye on it. Because it's a lot to think about, but I do see some of you, I know some of you would be great at this. And I know some of you have people on your boards who would be great at this and who could really see the big picture, what if they saw some of these charts and maps.
And I think one of our lessons would be is you don't have to be great at this.
Oh, that's a good point.
This isn't something that requires extensive education, extensive experience. This is being comfortable, again, figuring out first what you can do within your own personal circumstances to show that modeling behavior. I just think this modeling behavior is a huge piece of success. And then secondly, okay, who is somebody, just one person, who is one person that I would be comfortable having this conversation with? And you just kind of have it. This isn't have you thought about, you've got 14 points written out that you're going to work these folks through. You sort of begin it by engaging in a conversation about, well, the library's been a really great resource, but we really have concerns about long-term sustainability, especially if we want to continue to do new programs, or we want to be able to add an addition in future years, or we're scared that the money the city's giving us every year isn't covering what we need for operations and maintenance. So it may be, you can have the conversation from an opportunity standpoint. You can also have the conversation from a need standpoint. And then you just begin to circle around on some of this. But again, if people ever have questions, they ever want to have a discussion, they ever want to have somebody kind of mentor them through the process, the Nebraska Community Foundation's built that system to help community leaders do that.
That's great.
Well, let me just go on to two final slides then, if I may. That's just a reiteration of where these things are available.
Oh, this is interesting.
We're doing a lot of work with libraries already. So in these 12 communities and several other, these are 12 where I know there's already at least $50,000 in resources that have been committed, from everything from building a new building, like what's happening in Wausau and Bertrand, to creating a substantial endowment, which there's now a $650,000 endowment in place for the library in Nebraska City. In many of these places, there's specific programming pieces, like the one in Wyomore or Greeley or Hebron. There's lots of good work that's happening. But I feel like we're just on the very front end of this.
Lots more to go.
Yeah, there's an article this morning in the Lincoln paper about the Waverly Library. And that's that group of folks have a community-based affiliated fund. There's an account within the Waverly community-based affiliated fund specifically dedicated to help create resources to start this virtual library that they've gotten started, and to ultimately figure out how they could have a physical facility for it. That's that. And then the other one that I think many of you are familiar with is a couple years ago, a longtime donor and who passed away to the Nebraska Community Foundation, a woman named Shirley Bennett, created the Bennett Donor Advised Fund. And this is specifically for planning, enhancement, and facilities grants to public libraries and communities with fewer than 3,000 residents. So that the first grant cycle is just now coming to an end. I think we had 12 or 13 applications that were submitted on October 1st. Based upon conversations with those, I think 6 or 7 or 8, something like that, have moved to sort of the full application process.
Oh,
and
that's
just
great. That's
yeah.
a good size number.
And I think most of those were for facilities this year. But one of the things that we have in place is we have 280 some libraries here, I think 282 libraries in Nebraska in places that have 3,000 or fewer residents. 182 of those facilities are accredited, 100 of those are not. So there's actually a segment of this that's been set aside to help non-accredited libraries with planning to help move toward accreditation.
Oh, that would be marvelous, wouldn't it?
And then the
that opens so many doors for them.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the enhancement grants are primarily around programs. The facilities grants are around, of course, rehabilitation, and expansion of existing facilities. So we're very excited about this program. We haven't seen, I guess, not what we would consider to be tremendous demand in this first year, but hopefully we can continue to get the word out, and in future years there'll be additional pieces. So not only is this going to do a lot of good There's actually about $70,000 a year available for this, so it's a fairly sizable chunk of money.
So this is a brand new thing, or has this been around for a while?
This is the first year.
Ah, okay.
And it'll be
So-
something annual then, so
Great.
libraries that didn't apply this time can think about applying next time.
So I just thought this was an easy venue to bring this back up and remind people that this is a resource that's available. And if they have any
Great.
questions, there's a specific piece, or they can contact one of us at the Nebraska Community Foundation. And my contact information is the last slide. So
We do have one question from one of the board members at Gilbert Public Library. Jordan McGowan wants to know, how did you establish the priorities within the foundation in Red Cloud?
those are locally determined.
Whatever you
So
need
what?
in your
Right.
location.
So what? You know, again, the folks that build a community are the people that live, work, and sleep in that community.
So perhaps the board, there's like a board, an advisory board to these funds. Is that
Yeah.
how it works?
That is how it works. And the staff of the Nebraska Community Foundation helps that group of local leaders to talk about what are your priorities, what do you want to get started with, what are your needs, how do we prioritize those, how do we create a plan and sequence activities,
And so if someone
and then we
has
just get started.
an affiliated fund and there's that advisory group
Mhm.
and they want to bring an issue to the advisory group, it'd be good to like find out when they meet.
Yep.
And maybe contact the community foundation.
They can
to get some
easily,
advice.
yeah, you can easily contact us. We can put you in touch with whoever the local leaders might be in your specific place. If there's not currently an affiliated fund, myself or one of my colleagues are happy to come and visit with you about that. It's pretty simple, actually.
It's great.
So did I answer the question?
I don't know. Jordan, is that good?
Other
Good
questions?
ideas? Anybody else have any other questions? You can. She said yes, you did. You can type them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar interface there. Like nothing urgent is coming through right away. I can't see if they're in the middle of typing,
Right.
so I don't know.
Well, we can just take a minute or two to thank Jeff for coming over today and going through this with us. When I saw that you had updated this study and the vast amount of money we were talking about, I was like, oh man, we got to get Jeff over here right away. First part of the year.
And if I may, thank you for having me today. And one of the things that we're very willing to do, myself, my colleagues, there's 17 people that serve as the board of directors for the Nebraska Community Foundation. All of us are in a position to come and meet with your local groups. One of the things we also do with this transfer of wealth information is we're talking to lots of civic clubs.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots of, like the local Rotary or Kiwanis clubs. I've done several of those in the last couple months. And it's just kind of about raising the awareness. So if there's a local club or, you know, a local speakers forum that happens through your library or, you know, otherwise, we're happy to come and do this because it's one of these things that it's one of these things that's important, but it's not urgent.
Mm-hmm.
So many times people say that's interesting and they just sort of set it aside. So one of the things we're really committed to is how do you do public education around this opportunity to get the conversation started. So if any of you, you know, have an idea or want to talk with one of us about potentially doing that, we'd be happy to do that.
That sounds great for some of those activities that you have out that are either sponsored by the library or sponsored by another local group. That sounds like it'd be a great venue for this.
Whoever you're partnering with in your community, whoever the library's partnering with for everything they do, anything else they do.
Well, thank you both for having me here today.
Thank you very much. If you've actually inspired me, I'm thinking now I want to go and call my mom and see what she's planning for her retirement. I'm from New York, so back there, but I'm going to want to ask her, what are you doing? What are you doing with your money? Where are you giving it to? 'Cause like you, I'm good, but what's going to happen?
It's actually
'Cause I don't
important.
know.
It's important stuff for all of us to know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeff, as usual, all of the PowerPoint and all the links mentioned here will be included when the recording goes up, so you'll have access to everything that was in here, those maps and everything if you want to. You could, I assume it'd be okay if they wanted to borrow some of the information from here and use their own.
If people, I mean, the only thing we ask for is if you're going to use the information, please provide attribution.
Yeah, of course, yep. So the statistics, but the good statistics are in there too. That can be very impressive to people. You might
And
be
all that
talking to,
information's on our website. So
great. So that would
Great
be
slides that we can use for just to kind of get people interested too. I think get the conversation started.
Absolutely. And if you do need more information, obviously contact Jeff and the other people at the Nebraska Community Foundation. So thank you very much, Jeff and Mary Jo, for helping us here today. And I hope you'll join us next week for next week's NCompass Live, which
What are we going to do next week?
It's actually cataloging again, which is a very popular topic on NCompass Live for some reason.
Lots of things happening in cataloging these days.
Linked data in libraries, what, why, and how. I'm Emily Nemsikant, who is the cataloging librarian here at the Nebraska Library Commission. We'll talk about work that the Library of Congress is doing about linked data and explaining all of that and how that will all work for you, so that she will be here with us next Wednesday morning. So sign up for that. Join us next week. And other than that, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kristen.
Bye.
Bye-bye.